You're listening to the Deep Purple Podcast, a fan podcast about one of the most legendary bands of all time, Deep Purple. We take a look at the music, history, and people behind the band Deep Purple and beyond. Welcome to the Deep Purple Podcast, the first and only podcast devoted to one of the greatest bands in rock history, Deep Purple. Today's episode is episode 21, the end and the recap of Mark 1 through Mark 4. Coming to you from the suburbs of Chicago, where we celebrated the end of summer today, I am your host, Nathan Beaudry.
And coming to you from the home of coffee, milk, and Dell's Lemonade, John Mummy's Curse Matola.
Mummy's Curse.
I should have waited for October for that one. Damn it.
Oh, yeah, that should be for our Halloween episode. Do we need to restart? Or?
Now just use it again. Nobody will remember.
Yeah. Yes, John is coming to us from the home of coffee, milk, and Dell's Lemonade, the two sparring, battling official drinks of the state of Rhode Island. But I know when we were younger, there was like a big fight between them, but coffee milk won, right?
You know what? I don't know. To be honest with you.
Those of you not from Rhode Island, coffee milk is basically like chocolate milk, but we make in Rhode Island the special syrup that's coffee flavored and just like a sweet coffee syrup. There's no caffeine in it or anything. And growing up as a kid in Rhode Island, you'd go to like school lunch, you get an option for like milk, chocolate milk, or coffee milk. It's like a staple, and it's very good. And I've brought home a lot of like autocrat coffee syrup for people here. And like my brother-in-law, I bring home like one of those quart containers of it, and like a week later he's done with it.
Oh wow.
Yeah, like it's a big hit. It's really good. But people are really confused by that whole concept here. Like, you just give coffee to little kids? Like, no, there's no caffeine in it. And the thing about it is, like, when you grow up drinking that, when you start drinking coffee as a grown-up, you like go and get coffee and you're like, could you put 14 sugars and 6 creams in there? You know? Like, so everyone starts drinking coffee like it's super sweet. And most people drink iced coffee, you know? Like, you have to clarify in Rhode Island, like, if you want hot coffee. Like here, if you ask for a coffee, they'll give you a hot coffee. There, they would assume iced coffee. People drink iced coffee, like, you know, unless it gets below, I don't know what, 10 degrees, then they'll make it like 10 degrees Fahrenheit. I don't know what that is Celsius, but then they'll consider hot coffee.
Yeah, even still, I'll see some people in the friggin' dead of winter around here with iced coffee.
Oh,
it's
yeah.
like it's kind of crazy.
And it looks like coffee milk. It's like really pale because they put so much cream and sugar.
So much cream. Yeah, exactly. It's I had a friend years ago, and it was like she didn't get it. You know, she was one of these people who was like, and she would ask in like a really like just a way that was like really annoying. She's like, "What's Dell's? Like, I don't get it. Like, what's Dell's?" And I'm like, "You live friggin' 15 minutes outside of like Massachusetts. You like live right over the border. What do you mean, what's Dell's? Like, you an idiot?" You know, it's like, I just got so mad because it's like, she was just like, "What's Dell's?" You know, and I'm just like, all right, you got to calm down with that shit. Okay.
And Dell's is like it's like kind of like made with fresh lemon juice, but it's like a slushy almost, but there's like little bits of like lemon peel in there. It's really good.
Yeah, I mean, it's like when you say I'm going to get a Dell's, you're really saying I'm going to get like a lemonade slush, but it's like you don't call it a lemonade. You say, "Oh, there's Dell's." There's, you know, they have the little trucks and little, you know, the stores and everything. But if you go by the beach or like at the park, like when I took my niece to the park this summer, of course we had to get some because she wanted a slush, she wanted a lemonade.
Oh,
so.
And you serve it with a pretzel, right? A big pretzel rod, right? And you stir it up with a pretzel. They used to do that. The truck would come after school, and instead of an ice cream truck, it'd just be a lemonade truck, and you stick a pretzel rod in there, and you like break off a piece of the pretzel rod and then use it like a spoon to eat the rest of the lemonade. It's kind of weird.
We did not do that the other day or the other week.
You should have.
No, it was just the lemonade. Which,
stuff.
true to a 5-year-old, she did not finish it. So So one
So,
sip and then she was done.
so that concludes our this episode of culinary delights of Rhode Island. But these two battle we had these two battling official state drinks, and I think eventually Autocrat coffee milk won and became the official state drink of Rhode Island. So of course, if only there
Probably.
was some sort of machine right directly in front of me that could answer this question for me. But I'm going to use that to research things about Deep Purple instead for today.
Yeah,
Um,
seeing as this is not the coffee milk podcast.
yeah, you may not have coffee. I could do a coffee milk podcast though. The Autocrat syrup versus Eclipse. Which one's
Oh,
better?
watch out. Them's fighting words.
I know, right? Well, you look at it's funny if you look at the back of somebody had gotten me a thing of Eclipse and brought it here. And I looked at the back and it says manufactured by Autocrat. So their main competition is made by them.
Unbelievable. I love it. I
So
love it.
anyway, if this is your first time tuning in, you must just be so grateful to be learning all this stuff about Deep Purple. If you want to keep up to date on the show, you can subscribe on Apple Podcasts or whatever your preferred podcasting software is. You can subscribe on YouTube, where most of our videos will make it there, hopefully. We're on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. Links to all of that are at deeppurplepodcast.com. And two best ways to support the show are: one, become a patron on Patreon, join the Hall of Heroes, and donate to the show to help us out. And spread the word by leaving us a rating on Apple Podcasts and give us a 5-star review. That really helps new people discover the show.
I saw recently, I go on YouTube a lot, but I don't watch our videos. But I did notice, and correct me if I'm wrong, our Tommy Bolin episode seemed to have had like quite a few views already. Like sometimes we don't get a lot of views, and I know sometimes we get no views because we're blocked. But the ones that do get views, I think Tommy Bolin has only been out for like a few days and it has like 32 views or something. I mean, that's
Tommy Bolin came out this morning as we're recording this.
Okay, well,
it did, yeah. It did have
for
like
us. For us, it has a lot of views.
Yeah, that's a lot of views. I mean, it's nothing compared to like what the audio feed gets, but yeah, it gets a lot of views and a lot of comments. And Jim Massa is probably the most frequent viewer and commenter there. He's a great old school Deep Purple fan, has lots of great stories and stuff to share, and he had some really great posts and things to make there. And he actually did comment today like, oh, I noticed you guys never put out an episode for Machine Head. I was like, no, we did. It just didn't hit YouTube for whatever reason. So check out the audio feed. So I think, that's kind of why we put it on YouTube. It's a very, very small number of views we get, but for the odd chance that there are some people that prefer getting the show that way, we figure it's easy enough to throw it up on YouTube. So
sure.
So a few things going on in social media. Trinkle Bonker, our old friend Michael Erickson, posted. He actually sent. I think he emailed it to me, or I can't remember. But he had an interview with Dan McCafferty of Nazareth in 1989, and broke it down into several segments. And one of the things that came up was Tommy Bolin. And he said, we may not have been angels, but we always avoided the hard stuff. We toured with Deep Purple in the States in 1976, and I worried about Tommy Bolin. He was a beautiful man and a good guitarist, but he did not want to listen to people that warned him about that shit. I tried to talk to him, and he said, Jimi Hendrix did it, and look how good he was. And I said, but Tommy, Jimmy is dead. I actually saw Hendrix early on, and it was way better than the last time I had a chance to see him. Tommy Bolin was one of these guys that the business just eats up. It was a good tour for us, and we did better than Purple, really. So telling a little story there about, it's funny that I guess in the mind of an addict, he would justify it by saying, well, look how great Jimi Hendrix was on guitar. He did a lot of drugs. And at that point,
forgetting what the end result was.
At that point, he'd been dead for like 5 or 6 years,
Well, I mean, you could argue a lot. I mean, I don't know. You could argue that a lot of people were great on drugs, but I mean, if you look at like, I think it's a difference between like, if you look at like him, like Jim Morrison, Aerosmith, anybody that's great. It's like in the early days when drugs were like fun,
Sure.
It
Yeah.
was they were good. But then when drugs became a crippling habit,
Hmm.
that's then you those are like, oh yeah, those are the albums that sucked.
Well, yeah. I mean, look at Glenn Hughes. He cranked out these great trapeze albums, some great Deep Purple albums. Started to get into it. He somehow managed to get "Play Me Out" out. I don't know how, and then
Hmm.
it was just like this void. You know, he he did some stuff here and there. He was back in trapeze. He was kicked out again. He was, he resurfaces in Black Sabbath and barely gets an album out, gets kicked out of the band there. I mean, he was just stumbled through the 80s until he got cleaned up. He really he put some stuff out, but it was very inconsistent.
Yeah, I mean, even like the Sabbath album, he was actually really good on. But if I remember right, and it was I read it a long time ago, is I think that he didn't even continue on with the band because he wasn't even like he wasn't fit to tour.
Right.
Like
He I think he started, and I'm thinking back to my Sabbath Bloody podcast episode where he really covered that in details. But I seem to remember he started the tour, but couldn't finish it,
mhm.
and that's when Ray Gillen came in, or was it?
I think it was Ray Gillen came in for an album, and then Tony Martin, and the Ray Gillen album never even like got recorded. They just re-recorded it all with Tony Martin vocals, and I have the Ray Gillen mixes, which I love Ray Gillen, and I thought that it was like he was like much better
Yeah,
on a lot of the songs. Like I prefer a lot of them, but that's just because like I mean they're basically the same style of singer, but it's just like I like what Ray did more, and I think it was whatever was the usual stuff, politics, whatever. Probably
yeah,
did on with the band, but anyways, yeah. So I mean, yeah, Glenn Hughes did some. It was inconsistent, but I mean, the fact that the guy is still around, oof, thank
yeah,
goodness.
exactly. Yeah, he could have easily went the way of Bolin, but thankfully he did
Yeah.
not.
Yes.
Um, Sleep Fan on YouTube points out. So I made a mistake, a pretty big mistake on the last episode. Well, the last episode that came out. So I think this is going to be episode before. We're like a little ahead now, so I'm confused. But
Yeah.
the Tommy Bolin episode, I talked about, oh my God, there's this album Sunset Ride by Zephyr that I'd never heard of before, and I mistakenly said that it came out between the the
The
first Zephyr
first
album and going back
and
to Colorado,
you
but
got it.
it actually came out after going back to Colorado. So I I
And after Tommy
mistakenly,
Bolin left, right?
so it wasn't a Tommy Bolin album.
Hmm.
So I made a mistake. So I was surprised, like, how was this Tommy Bolin album that I missed? Well, I didn't miss it. It never was a Tommy Bolin album. But that being said, I stand by what I said. I thought it was a really good, solid album. It might have even been better than the first two.
Yeah, a couple of good tracks on it, but it was like I was actually like struggling to hear Tommy Bolin in it. And that like we just said, good reason for that because he wasn't on
You're
it.
like, oh, this doesn't really sound like him.
But I'm like, wow, he was really reserved on this song. Like, didn't hear anything like any of his signature sounds.
So yeah, I went like 25 years not knowing about that album, and then I found out about it. I'm like, how did I miss this? And I should have just trusted my instincts. But some people are quick to jump and say, "Oh, you guys got this thing wrong." But let me remind you, as we talked about from our first episode, we are not experts. We don't claim to be experts. We make mistakes, and oftentimes just have a short time to prepare for these episodes. So we're always learning new things and getting new information from all of the great people that follow this show that know far more about the band than we do. Which
Yeah,
is great.
and to be fair, I mean, it's like the few times that anybody's corrected us, I don't think it's ever been like rah 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 disrespectful. It's just kind of like pointing out facts, which is very cool because uh, why are you gonna argue over this kind of stuff, right?
Right. Almost without exception, are fans that are a generation older than us or just have more knowledge than us are extremely cool with us in letting us know if we make a mistake or two. But, even I would challenge even the biggest fan to just sit here and yak for 2 hours about Deep Purple and not make some sort of mistake. I'll listen back to an episode. Let me listen to the audio quality, and I'll hear either you or me just say something that's completely wrong, that we know is wrong, but we just misspoke. And I'm just like, why did we say that? We know that's not true. And then sometimes there's situations like this where that I didn't misspeak. I just got it wrong, you know? So we're going to continue to do that. And thank you for everyone for being so cool about it. Continue to broaden our knowledge. And I guess we're offering some sort of entertainment even for the die-hard fans because they're listening. So.
And keep in mind too, we could be firing on a fourth of a brain cell because you're sick, I'm tired,
Yes.
whatever. Like you're tired, I'm sick, both.
We're doing this. We're doing this after waking up at a super early time, working all day, getting all of our life in order, staying up until 1 a.m. to record this, and then having to wake up again at 5 or 6 the next morning to go to work. So yeah, we do make mistakes, and thank you for being so cool about that and understanding this is unfortunately not our full-time job. If it was, you could definitely skewer us harder for our mistakes. Chris Child on Twitter brought something really interesting up, which I think I had heard before, but it sounded really familiar when he mentioned it. But we talked about the album Bang by James Gang.
Yeah.
And he says that picture of Tommy Bolin, he says he thinks he heard that it was superimposed over the old guitarist head because they took this picture before Tommy joined the band. And when you look at it, you're like, I can kind of see that. Like maybe even the hat is just kind of superimposed over everything.
Yeah.
So that's very believable. I don't know if it's 100% true, but
you never know. I mean, there are like so many stories about like cut and paste jobs on albums back before there was Photoshop. I mean, you should hear some of the stories that I've heard about, like Kiss ones alone. There's the same thing with the Lick It Up album cover, the famous first album cover, Kiss with no makeup, just a
yep.
white background, picture of the band, and there was like whole like conspiracy theories dedicated to whether Vinnie Vincent was superimposed on there, like just his face, and if the body was a mannequin. And there was like, but there were like breakdowns of like different shots from that photo shoot being like, look at the arm. And it's like, I guess if you look hard enough, you could see like, well, yeah, actually that just looks like, like a sleeve with no arm in it, tucked behind a thing or whatever. And you're just like, you're second guessing yourself. But it's like for years and years, you look at it and you think like, oh, it's fine. It's just people in it, and even like we're talking about Ray Gillen, the first Badlands album cover, like just a band shot. Been looking at it for like 30 years, and then I had read some kind of thing where it's just like, yeah, the whole band didn't even do that shoot together, and like two of the guys were actually like cut and pasted in. And then when I really looked at it, I was like, holy crap, yeah, it does look.
Just like all the stuff we just, we learned reading about the In Rock album cover and things like that. You're like, oh yeah, like it's obvious when you know it, but before that, you don't really think about it. You don't think about it that detail. And there's a lot of stuff going on like that. And people have these conspiracy theories. It generally kind of comes down to like, oh, let's try to fix it after the fact and screwing it up or whatever.
But it's funny because now looking at that picture of Tommy Bolin, all I can see is like how much of an outline his head. Yeah, well, and I mean, it could just be because I want to see it because you just told me, but I'm like, wow, he looks really like crisp on that album cover. It almost looked like there's like a little light around him or like a little glow, like somebody like cut it out and just like pasted it on.
Yeah, it looks like it's like a better resolution than the rest of the album cover even.
Yeah. It's funny.
And the other thing, we got a ton of comments on social media, just a lot of love for Stormbringer and for Tommy Bolin. So a lot of people just kind of going back and forth with, oh, yeah, I like Stormbringer too. So it's great to see all those people come out of the woodwork. And not a lot of, I didn't get any people just being like, I mean, not that I can think of anyway, that were trashing it and being like, Stormbringer's crap. It was mostly just people speaking highly of it and saying that they really loved it too. And some people might not have been there. The biggest criticism seemed to be like it doesn't seem like it's a Deep Purple album, which is fair because it doesn't really sound like one. The band had evolved a lot by that point.
I don't know though. I mean, it's just like I mean, since it's like the recap show, and I guess we're kind of freewheeling or whatever. Like, I don't know. I never like all through getting into Deep Purple. Like, I mean, I knew the albums were like different lineups and kind of sounded different, but to me, it was all Deep Purple.
Yeah.
You know, like Stormbringer to me was just as much of a Deep Purple album as Machine Head. They just sounded different. They just had different lineups or different songs on them. Like I never thought like I don't know, like when you hear an album where you're like, oh, what a departure, you know, they really screwed up there. You know, it's like I don't think any of those original albums ever had that feeling for me because they never tried to do like a concept album or
Mm.
and I mean they already like jumped the shark doing the whole orchestra thing early. So I mean they could have even gone back and done that. It just seems like anything they did, it was just like, oh, it's Deep Purple. They could like, you know, I mean, Richie even like, you know, emulated a friggin' oboe with the volume swells, you know, cello or whatever. And it's like, and it still sounded, and if he actually played a real cello on a Deep Purple album, it would have sounded, you know, in place, in my opinion.
Well, I think to us too, we got all of those early albums at the same time,
Yeah.
and other people that were living through it were, you know, waiting a year between albums or something, and that can definitely flavor things too. You know, if you listen to
Yeah.
something when you're 18 and then you have to wait 2 years until you're 20 for the next album or whatever, that follows you through your life. And for us, it was at our own speed. We could listen to them as quickly as we could get them. We listened to them. We weren't
That's true.
waiting and anticipating, oh my God, what's the next album going to be like? It was already in the past. So that,
Yeah.
I think, changes things.
That would be interesting to hear an original Deep Purple fans like from the time, like living through it, like their take on the whole thing, like how they perceived it, as opposed to us. Like basically all the bands, pretty much all the bands that I liked or still like to this day, like it was the same thing. By that time, all their classic albums had already been released, so I just bought them whenever I had enough allowance.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, it's definitely an interesting thing. So,
yeah.
um, okay, so as before we move on to the next segment, thanking our patrons, we got Clay Wambacher, Steve Seaborg from alltheworldsofstage.net at the $5 tier. We've got Peter Gardeau at the $3 tier and Els Murders at the $1 tier. Thank you to all of you.
Yes.
And we're going to do just a quick little history wrap up as we've concluded the studio albums last week. We've just got a little history to cover of what happened after Come Taste the Band. And it wasn't a heck of a lot, but the work that Tommy Bolin did on the album was incredible. As we talked about, he carried, was it 7 of the tracks? I think he had writing credits on everything. Yeah, I think he had. No, he didn't have writing credits on You Keep On.
Almost everything. Right.
It was all, I think it was 7 of 9 tracks or whatever it was.
Yeah.
You know, this was, you know, Tommy Bolin featuring Deep Purple for all intents and purposes. But unfortunately, their live set was so inconsistent and disjointed because of he and Glenn Hughes's problems with drugs at that point that he wasn't really able to get out there and put to bed the whole, oh, we miss Richie thing. There was still a lot of people thinking, oh, this new guy stinks, because some nights he wasn't great, but when he was on, he was one of the best, and when he wasn't, there were problems. Come Taste the Band is often, unfortunately, forgotten or dismissed by fans. And Hughes says that during the live sets, they'd be on stage for an hour and 45 minutes, and Coverdale would sometimes be off stage for about 45 minutes while the band was jamming with Hughes singing, just kind of getting into these long, extended jams. Coverdale says he thought that the band members had all become spineless, that he could see the wheels coming off of the band, and he felt powerless to do anything about it. In an interview with Tony Stewart, one of Deep Purple's managers in 1976, he says, I refuse to stand on stage. I'm sorry, not Tony Stewart. That's the wrong Stewart. Is it John Stewart? No, that's that's the Daily.
Oh boy.
Tony Edwards. I'm sorry, I'm thinking Tony Edwards. Tony Stewart, the journalist, interview with Coverdale. Coverdale says, I refuse to stand on stage with Glenn while he's doing his bloody Georgia on My Mind, and I'm standing there in the dark saying, come on, get it out of your system. Where's the band? Come on, Tommy, get out. Come on, John, do your classical bits. and I'd go off and have a cigarette. That ain't no band. Then Ian turns around and says, Dave, stop bellowing so much. I got that gig on the strength of my talent. Nobody did me a favor. Those cats wanted me to work. Like I've got the good to do it. And up to now, people have only heard one facet of my talent. So I guess in 1976, he's starting to get pretty frustrated with things in the band, and that's what he said. I don't know if that was before or after the breakup.
Wonder what Coverdale was doing off stage for 45 minutes. I mean, he must
I have some ideas.
have been like frogging some groupies.
Frogging.
You know, having a cigarette and then having a little shag on the side. You know,
Yeah, I mean, that's what you just imagine Coverdale's always doing if he's out of sight or you lose track of him for a few minutes.
it's like, oh, Coverdale.
Oh, that Coverdale.
I just imagine, like, you know, they wrap up the solos and everything, and he just walks back out on stage, like buttoning up his pants and, like, you know, going like this, wiping his shirt off, and he's like, "Thank you, good night." It's like, the hell was that guy doing back there?
Nah, I mean, I can only imagine.
Nah, he probably wasn't, but well, he might have been. But anyways, that just would have been funny. He comes out just like, you know, buttoning his shirt up, like, you know, like waving to somebody backstage, like, call me.
So the band's management was really worried about Hughes going to start this tour. They were basically like, this guy is not going to be able to do it. He's just too messed up. And it's funny because Tommy Bolin was just as messed up, but seemed to have it a little more under control, at least visibly. And they said to him that he had to kind of prove himself, that he could clean himself up and that he could make it through a tour. So their test for him was the live performance of the Butterfly Ball at the Albert Hall. He kind of opens the thing with the song Get Ready. And they said, if you can go there and perform that without any issues, you'll be back in, you'll be in the band, you'll be good. So Glenn Hughes even talks in one of his books about how he cleaned himself up for like for a short period of time, maybe a day. And he goes and he performs the Butterfly Ball thing, nails the song, walks off stage, and immediately starts doing lines of coke. But he had proven to them. They said, "Oh yeah, Glenn's got it together, so we'll let him go on tour with the band." So they went off to New Zealand, and they were calling this the No Drugs Tour. And Hughes says that for 6 weeks they were clean and everything was great, and that's pretty amazing. But after that, things started to go bad, and it really goes bad. Do you know the kind of stories of what happened to them in Indonesia?
No.
So it's a really terrible story. But they go to Indonesia and they get off the plane, and the streets are just lined like Caesar returning to Rome, just tens of thousands of people greeting them like they're heroes, and this big deal. They're going to play this venue. It was about 125,000 people per night, and they would have made $1 million for these two shows.
Wow.
So pretty good payday for 2 days work. The promoter for the gig had, as security, had the Indonesian military. So it was this very like intimidating security detail for the band and for the show. The capacity of the venues went way over what they should have put into these venues, so people were just packed in there. So one night, these two girls show up in Glenn Hughes's room. He's with a friend. They were sent by the promoters, and Hughes says afterwards he didn't really think about it at the time, but they must have been prostitutes. And they start like, you know, they're just in the room with them, and all the things that you'd imagine are going on. And Patsy Collins, one of the road crew, gets in an altercation with somebody in the room, and he storms out of the room. And Glenn, after a little while, is like, feels weird. So he says he goes into the hallway and he just kind of hears this silence. And he said it just was eerie and he couldn't find Patsy anywhere. So he just went back to the room. The next morning, they wake up and find out that Patsy Collins had fallen down an open elevator shaft and died.
Damn.
And the police end up showing up. They arrest Glenn Hughes and one of the other guys with the band. I forget who it was exactly. And put, you know, it's this really like intense situation where they're pointing guns at them and saying, you're the last person that saw this guy alive. What happened? Yada, yada, yada. And they let them out the next night to play the show, but Glenn's got like an armed guard like standing beside him to make sure he doesn't run away, and it's this really terrible situation. And he's just lost this friend of his, and it's this terrible, terrible ordeal. Well, it turns out that the general consensus is that they believe that the promoters had this guy killed to create the situation so that they wouldn't have to pay Deep Purple, and that's exactly what happened. They didn't pay the band. So they
Wow.
just barely got out of Indonesia at the end of this whole big ordeal. They went to leave the country. They found that the tires on the plane had been slashed, and they needed to pay all this extra money to get the new tires, but they weren't allowed to help them. So like the co-pilot and some of the roadies had to change the tires on the plane themselves. It's a horrible situation, but they flew out of Indonesia, and later on with Mark, I guess it would have been Mark II reunion, they talked about going to Indonesia, and John Lord basically just told the band, I'm not going back to Indonesia. And I think they ended up going maybe after he left the band or something, but he said it was such a horrible situation that had happened there that he just never wanted to go back to the country, even though he knew it was irrational that they wouldn't have that same situation. It kind of scarred them all.
Mm.
So pretty terrible, terrible situation. And then they get to Japan, which I'm sure they're all glad to be there. But Tommy Bolin has this incident, which I believe you've heard of, where he took too much or whatever, falls asleep on his arm for a really long time and ends up getting this pinched nerve, so he could basically not even use his arm. So they go on stage and Tommy Bolin's like just basically playing bar chords the entire time because he can barely move his arm. So it wasn't really a great show.
Yeah, I've heard that one. Yeah, it's too bad.
And they recorded it, the last concert in Japan, and they were
Oh. Yeah, they recorded it and released it.
yes, and it's unfortunate. Glenn Hughes says they were all drunk on Mai Tais and pina coladas, and Hughes said, I think in one of the shots, like he's off side of the stage throwing up. Very, very bad situation.
What a poor decision. It was the no, they called the no drugstore. It was like no comma drugs exclamation point.
Exactly.
Not no drugs. No drugs.
No drugs. Well, if you saw them in New Zealand, it was probably fine. But I think by the time they got to Southeast Asia, it was all off the rails.
My goodness.
Uh,
Oh, that's bad.
So they couldn't return to the UK, or they couldn't return to the UK because they'd been in the country for more than 30 days a year for tax purposes. So they had to like be out of the country for a certain amount of time, or else they'd have to pay more taxes. That's why they all moved and all that. So they ended up doing like a short little American tour between LA and North Carolina. And they took this, interestingly, they took this DC-9 jet from LA to North Carolina. It was the exact, not the same model, but the exact same plane that Lynyrd Skynyrd was in when they crashed and they lost the members of the band. So very interesting connection for our friends at Skynyrd Reconsidered podcast. A bad connection, unfortunately, but kind of a weird bit of history there. So at a certain point, they said, I can't remember where I read this, but Tommy said he didn't even want to get high with Hughes anymore.
My God.
And Hughes was finding dealers and getting high alone because he was turning into this paranoid mess. He tells this story about thinking he's seeing this person yelling at him in his yard, and he goes out with like a shotgun, like in his underwear or something, trying to like shooting rounds at somebody that's not even there. At one point, John Bonham and one of these shows pulls a gun on Hughes because he heard that Hughes had been sleeping with his wife, and Hughes was like, "I'm not sleeping with your wife." It's one of the like that situation we heard about with Gillen, where that guy was like, "You're sleeping with my wife," and Gillen's like, "No, I'm not." It's like, yeah, but I could see that maybe you did. I could see why somebody might think that, and I don't know if I entirely believe you. Kind of same situation with this, but Bonzo came up and just like punched Glenn Hughes in the mouth and chipped a tooth, and then apparently they worked it all out and went and got wasted together. So just kind of crazy stuff that happens back then. The next night, someone tried to give Hughes some coke, and Bob Cooksey, who'd been hired to be alongside Hughes to keep him straight, just knocked the guy out. So, I guess he was doing his job. Is really literal. I was like, I'll do whatever it takes. And he wasn't able to get any coke, so he went on stage like not high for the first time in a long time, and he was like, Hughes said he was like, wow, I was impressed with how well I played and performed. This is great. But of course, it didn't last very long. Hughes was using uppers to lose weight, and he was in full-blown cocaine psychosis. He called the hotel manager at a hotel saying that there was a man in a yellow hat trying to break into his room from the window, but he was on the 24th floor.
And Curious George came in and shit got weird.
Maybe you might have seen that too. And Hughes said that he thought everyone expected him to die, and his parents were expecting every phone call they got would be somebody telling them he died. And it's funny because he would continue this lifestyle for almost 2 more decades after this, and it's really kind of one of those miracle stories, like kind of like Ozzy, like, or Nikki Sixx or whoever. Like, how did they make it through this alive? So they played the last U.S. show with Tommy, and Glenn tried to skip out of the flight back to the UK, but he was essentially thrown onto the plane. And Hughes says he would sleep for 3 to 4 days straight, wake up in a cold sweat, eating whatever he could, going back to sleep. Just, again, to me, this just sounds absolutely awful, this whole thing that he's going through. So March 15th was the day that Deep Purple sort of officially broke up. Hughes said he couldn't play well. Lord had to drag him on stage, and Hughes says it was the lowest point in Purple. The band had abandoned him. He was by himself. He said it was a miracle that he made it to the gigs at all. Bolin's on stage being berated by Blackmore fans, and John Lord says this of the last show. At one point during the show, Glenn said to the audience, "I'm sorry we're not playing well, but we're very tired and jet lagged." And I remembered spluttering to myself, "Speak for yourself. I was working like a Trojan to try to make this work. Pacey was playing like a madman just to keep it together. Coverdale was singing his socks off. So to hear this guy who was extremely high on various substances telling the audience, 'I'm sorry we aren't playing well,' kind of rankled me a bit. I came off stage and I went straight to my dressing room, which I was sharing with Ian Pace, and I said, 'Ian, that's it, isn't it? That's absolutely the end of this band as far as I'm concerned. We aren't doing this to ourselves.' So he and I shook our hands and said, 'It's over, thank God.' And about 10 minutes later, Coverdale came in, big blustery guy that he is, and said, 'I'm leaving the band.' And we said, 'David, there is no band to leave.' And that was it. They broke up, and it seems like in true Deep Purple management fashion, it was completely passive-aggressive. They didn't tell everybody. Coverdale tells a story about he was talking to Hughes at Ian Pace's wedding about working on a solo album, and Glenn didn't know still at that point that he'd even left Deep Purple. Management hadn't told him. Or maybe they did and he was too messed up, but he's still thinking, oh, the band's together and going along, and Coverdale's like, yeah, well, I'm working on the solo album. He's like, oh, cool. How are you going to fit that into the band schedule? Shouldn't be a problem.
Unbelievable. It blows my mind too. Like if anybody else behaved like that at a regular 9-to-5 job, they would have lost it so friggin' fast.
Yeah, you think?
But rock stars could just do whatever they want, basically, and it's just like, I mean, if I got like coked out of my mind and then people had to like, like pick me up and like shove me out, like, where, my work, they'd be like, I think you should go home and take everything in your desk with you.
Yeah, if you're coked out of your mind, like for like
obviously
years, obviously, like you're like walking around your job with like no shirt on, like yelling at customers and throwing up in the in the office
with like Mork suspenders on and going like, whoa, whoa.
Yeah, I wonder how long it would take behaving like that. I'm guessing a matter of hours.
Yeah, I think where we work, I think we would be dismissed within the day.
Probably, yeah. They probably wouldn't let the sun set on that.
Yeah.
So that was kind of it. He gets back with Trapeze briefly. Glenn Hughes does, and they end up kicking him out because he's so messed up. And he ended up moving up with Karen, Tommy's ex-girlfriend, and they later get married. And on December 4th, 1976, Glenn Hughes got a call that Tommy had died. And he and Karen received a postcard from him the day before with Tommy saying, "Oh, hey, I'll see you at Christmas time," and all this. So very sad. We could probably do a whole episode on Tommy Bolin and his unfortunate passing, but that was the end. The official end. We talked about the musical end last time, and that's kind of the touring and official end. So, all right, what we wanted to do now was there's quite a few little, a few little tidbits we wanted to cover that we hadn't gotten to during their proper albums. So some bonus tracks. We're going to start off with Burn here, and the Burn. I've got too many windows open here. The Burn track that we have is something we talked about earlier. It's called Coronarius Redig. And again, I still haven't spent any time Googling that. I don't know exactly what that's supposed to mean. Is it Latin? I don't know. But
Sounds
here, we're gonna play this track for you. Track's got a great feel to it.
Are you playing it?
Oops. Yep.
I can't hear it.
Nice soloing by Richie to kick it off.
No, I think that they could have put this on instead of A200.
That's what I'm thinking. Or I'm thinking like A200 like as a lead-in to Mistreated and stuck this somewhere else on the album. Like, I don't think they needed to lose A200. I just think they needed to not close the album with it.
I mean, this could have been nestled somewhere like nicely in the middle of the album.
It's a really good track. Listen to this part. This part gets me right here. Sounds like Catch the Rainbow. I think he might have repurposed some of the progression there.
Oh yeah, well I think it was just Richie's, where his style was going at the time, for sure.
And it's kind of a funky song, sorry to say. It's got that really cool 70s, almost funky vibe to it. And that's the only vocals you hear is these backing vocals from Hughes and Coverdale.
I really love that part.
And it was they used this as the B-side to, what was it? Might Just Take Your Life, I believe.
Which I think this has all the elements, the best elements of like the lineup at the time. You got a little bit of that medieval-y stuff in there. You got a little funky. Got a little 70s.
A nice percussive organ by Lord. It was supposed to have vocals, but I guess Coverdale got bombed the night before and couldn't really get it done, so they just did that backing vocal part. But to me, it's like, come on, you're like a huge rock band. You couldn't book another day of studio time, like the next day or something, and just finish the song off and threw it on the... I think there's enough good here that I would love to hear what Coverdale had worked out for it. Or would have worked out for it. Maybe didn't work anything out.
I think it stands alone as a great instrumental, though.
It is a really solid, even as an instrumental. I mean, it's a better instrumental than A200, I think you're right.
Yeah.
Would have been kind of a weird closer, but it would have brought up my overall score for Burn, for sure. That probably gives you the idea of the song. I don't think you need to go through the whole thing, but some good guitar work by Blackmore. It's a good track. I'd recommend checking it out. That's one of the ones that if I was listening to the special edition, I would leave that on. Like I would rock out to that song. I'd give it a solid 4.
I usually do too when I listen to the bonus tracks on this album. I play that one. I'll usually skip A200 and
Yeah.
go to this one.
Yeah.
I don't skip many things on Burn, but I'll usually skip that one just because I don't know. Just I'm never in the mood for it.
No, it's a weird song.
Yeah.
And then on there's not much for Stormbringer, sadly, but they do have an instrumental version of Highball Shooter, which we talked about before. It's kind of always interesting hearing instrumentals and hearing what you hear without the vocals going on. Other than that, it's just all remixes on that album, which we don't really get into because, again, in this format, and you're not going to hear much of a difference in a remix. It's interesting hearing this part with no vocals. Kind of listening to it without vocals, you're like, oh, didn't really realize the verse sounded like that.
Nice.
I don't think I really noticed the cowbell so much there in the chorus. So I think you get the idea with that one too.
Yeah, I always like to hear the songs without the vocals, just to hear this kind of stuff.
You can really hear Lord's piano work in the right channel there.
Yeah, this is really good.
Almost sounds like Tommy Bolin with that slide work he's doing on the song.
Yeah, Tommy Bolin could have done this song too.
I wonder if they played this live with him. Is this the one that Coverdale hated?
I think so. Like he didn't even know the name of it later.
He was like, I know it's in the key of A. That's all I remember about it. So I'll probably cut it off there. Gives you the kind of idea of what you're missing. So again, I think the best part of the 35th anniversary Stormbringer edition is the booklet. There's just so much great stuff in the booklet, but the actual album, that's really all you get other than some other various remixes. From moving on to Come Taste the Band, we've got this song Same in LA. Kind of heavier than a lot of the other stuff on their album.
Yeah. Wow, it's really different for them.
It makes you wonder if there's supposed to be other stuff going on here, but they just never laid down the vocal tracks or something. Like there's probably supposed to be some vocals over this part, and they just kind of threw in that little chorus part.
I was gonna say it sounds like an unfinished song idea.
I wonder if that's all three of them singing the chorus. Let's see. do it again. Kind of like a Coronarius redig situation where they just like never got around to completing it. Although they released that as a B-side, despite the fact that it was incomplete.
Well, it sounds a little more complete than this song. All right.
Yeah. Really raw bass sound.
Yeah, the very seldom heard John Lord organ in Come Taste the Band.
Yeah, exactly. That's where it all was on the album. They just threw it on the song. And it's weird because it's like an unaccompanied solo, basically. It's just like that one little kind of bass stinger at the end of each phrase.
Yeah.
I think this is a song that had a lot of potential, but, I guess, working on an album, you only got so much time, you've only got so much stuff you can put your resources into, so. It's interesting that they just had that one little vocal part at the beginning.
Yeah, I mean, it was definitely something that they probably worked on. It was yeah, definitely unfinished. They probably
That whole riff was just very... It didn't sound purplish, or even by saying that, I mean, even Tommy Bolin, really. But it reminds me of something, but I can't really put my finger on it. But interesting track. And then the last track is a little bit longer, so we'll probably not play the whole thing, but this is just a Tommy Bolin and Ian Pace jam, which is pretty interesting if you just want to hear two amazing musicians just playing together as a duet. It's just pretty much what it says it is. It's just Ian Pace holding down a killer groove and Bolin soloing over it. I don't know where everyone else was that day. Kind of like we listened to that jam by, was it John Lord, Ritchie Blackmore, and Ian Pace from Who Do We Think We Are, was it?
Yeah.
Like
no, that was the it was like the Fireball sessions, I think.
That was Who Do We Think We Are?
Wasn't it? Oh, maybe it was.
I could be wrong, but yeah, I know Roger Glover was stuck in traffic or whatever, so there's just the three of them playing.
Oh no, it was Who Do We Think We Are? Yeah, because Ritchie was playing bass.
Yes. Yeah. It's probably what they would have sounded like having a good night on stage, just missing John Lord and Clint Hughes, one of their extended jams. So again, this is one of those ones I don't think, I'm just going to kind of kill it, but not one of those things I think you're going to listen to every day, but as a piece of history, hearing these two great guys play together, definitely worth checking out.
There was a CD that I had gotten a while ago, and of course, in my infinite wisdom, I never dig this stuff out before the episode. But it was one of those. It was like, and I don't know if you had it or you've heard of. You must have, but it was like the Mark IV, like Come Taste the Band rehearsals. And it was like all like the raw versions of the song, like it was all them like playing live, like in a room with like, Coverdale and Hughes doing like, guide vocals or whatever. Like there weren't all like separate channels or whatever. It was just them like jamming and working out the song ideas. And some of them were titled as the actual songs, and other ones were just like, jam 1, jam 2, like jam 3, like stuff like that. And that was a really cool, like, artifact from this era.
I do have that, and I considered bringing some of it in. I was like, it's just going to be too much to go over, but that's something we could cover in a standalone episode probably one day. It's very, very interesting stuff.
But for all the lack of like the, maybe special features or special tracks or everything that like this album would have. Like that is almost like one, you know, in itself. I think still say that Fireball has the most comprehensive, like of all
Yeah.
the,
Yep.
but my favorite anyways, and then all the other ones just seem to fall short, you know. And
I think they could do a better job of stitching it all together into like something more listenable. And
mm-hmm,
like the Beatles anthology did a great job of that
yeah,
with taking like, and even recently they released the White Album with, you know, it'll be like uh, everybody's got something to hide except for me and my monkey, take 53, and you're just like, okay. And it's like this instrumental take, and listening to some of that stuff and the way that they produce it together, they'll put one of those little funny little skits in there, and then they'll go into like a completely redone version. And granted, the Beatles were a band that would do 100 takes of one song and change it up every time in a different style, and Deep Purple was like, you know, they do 3 takes maybe, and they'd all
or
be the
straight
same.
ahead, yeah.
But you know, the stuff like that, like the alternate version of speaking and stuff like that, is really exciting and interesting to me. And if they strung together like a Deep Purple anthology with all these different alternate takes and alternate versions, and that's kind of one of the things I really liked about Cher Kazoo, is like he'll put 3 different versions of uh, Driving Me Wild. You know, he'll do a heavy version and a kind of a slower version, and that was really interesting, even though, because that wasn't released really as an album, it was more of like, here's this unfinished project. And that stuff's really exciting, hearing those different alternate takes. And I listen to that, even though it's maybe not meant to be that. I used to listen to that as an album all the time. And the
Mm-hmm,
same thing with the Beatles anthology. You could listen to that as an album because it's not like you're hearing the same old thing. It's a different take on a lot of different things.
mm-hmm. No, yeah, definitely. That would be nice. That would be nice to have this for Deep Purple, but somebody's going to have to do it.
Yeah, I mean, there's also, you know, there's a lot more financially up at stake when you're doing this for the Beatles. For Deep Purple, maybe not as much,
Mm.
not as much call for it. But you know, the Beatles can just, you know, periodically just say, "Oh, hey, here's an album of a compilation of our love songs," and people, and it'll sell 5 million copies, and it's like, we've heard all these songs. These
Uh,
aren't new songs, but I mean, if people want to piss away money on these dumb compilations, why not?
yeah,
Good for them.
yeah. God bless them.
Okay, and now what we're going to do to kind of close things out is we've got just kind of a recap of, I put it out on Twitter, and we had talked about it, I think, in our last episode, or maybe after the episode in the wrap up, I can't remember.
Yeah.
Just kind of a recap of Mark 1 through 4. And I put it out there to just be like, hey, everybody, what's your favorite album? Who's your favorite member? What are some hypotheticals? So I just kind of isolated mostly the hypotheticals, like, you know, or questions like, what would you like to ask about Mark 1 through 4? Like, what are some of the burning questions out there? And do you want to just kind of get into them, or did you have any to kick it off? Or
No, I usually do good when we're just kind of in the middle of something, stream of consciousness type of stuff, you know.
all
So
right, stream of consciousness.
yeah.
All right, Chris Inkpen111 on Twitter asks, what is the Purple song you could happily never hear again?
Yeah, when I read that one, that one was easy. Place in line. Bye.
I knew you were gonna say no. I knew it. I was driving home from work last night, and I was thinking about that question, and I was like, oh, he's gonna say place in line.
I mean, yeah, there's like a million of them from like Mark 1, but it's like I
True.
don't.
Yeah. Those are the obvious ones. Like pretty much almost anything from Mark 1.
But I
Well, no,
mean,
that's not true. There's some really good ones, but
that's just like if you just like lump all of Mark 1 together, you're like, well, nobody really pays attention to Mark 1. So it's like Mark 2 is the one that that's probably like in my mind the biggest blemish on their time together. So
if we're going Mark 1, I would. That's not going to be my official answer, but if we're going to go Mark 1, I would say I'm so glad.
yeah, I'm so glad never to hear this again.
Exactly.
Well, I mean, if we're talking about like all of like if we would go like maybe lineup by lineup, that would be kind of interesting. Like I would agree with that because we just hated that when we were listening to it.
I'm so glad. I'm so glad. I'm glad. I'm glad. Yeah, I would go with that. But to your point, and I'm
Hmm.
also gonna go Mark too. And this is probably unpopular, but I would go with the Mule.
I know you hate the mule.
The studio version of the
Yeah,
Mule. The live version I enjoy. The studio version is too repetitive.
I could have guessed that you would have chosen the mule.
Yeah,
Yeah.
the Mule. I would take the place in line over the Mule almost any day.
Uh,
Which I know people have a lot of love for the Mule, but it's kind of like we talked about. It's just like the Beatles song "Tomorrow Never Knows," like it was based on. If I had to pick a Beatles song, that would probably be it. That or Revolution Number 9. And the same way, I am very much like the Mule. Don't need to hear it again.
yeah, that's kind of a gun to the head scenario. I would probably like pick listening to the mule over that lazy ass slogging boring song. Oh, I didn't even know. Oh, Richie was probably just like, "Ugh, can we just like get this so I can go home?" It didn't even sound like Ian Gillan. It was just like I always thought it was weird. Like every time when I first heard it, every time after that, I'm always like, "Ugh." Oh. I don't know like if I related it to that, but it reminds me a lot of like on the last like original Aerosmith album, they had this song called Cheesecake on like Night in the Ruts, and it was the same thing. It was just like Joe Perry playing like the shittiest slide guitar solo you ever heard, and it's just like, oh, you could just tell that he was like bombed and not into it and everything. And he's not a bad guitar player, but it's like you heard that and you're just like, yeah, this is a low point because it was just like it's just like, oh god, this is terrible, you know. But anyways, that's what that made me think of. It's like when somebody is just like, "Hey, you know what? Let's go." It's like,
Exactly.
no, please don't. Please never do.
Please don't do that. Uh,
Please.
Inkpen111 on Twitter also asks, what if Paul Rogers had actually joined the band?
That's that's an interesting scenario. Like that's kind of an obvious one because when we talked about it, it's like we never even explored that. That I would mean I don't know, never a big Paul Rogers fan, but obviously I know what he
Yeah.
sounds like. I've heard Bad Company like
I,
on the radio and stuff. I
he's got a
think he,
great voice, and I can see why Richie was always courting him. But
he
well,
would
like
have
we
been a solid choice.
oh, it would have been. I think musically it would have been great, but I think it would have. I think it would have been like Ian Gillan, Blackmore, Mark II, like as far as the fighting goes,
Yeah.
because like we talked about, and I don't know much about Paul Rogers either, but I, from what I think we talked about this in one of those episodes where we talked about the Paul Rogers potential acquisition, was that Paul Rogers was another person with this huge ego, and I'm sure he and Blackmore would have just kind of clashed, and it would have, Blackmore is always excited to get some new singer, and then a year later hates them.
Right, because they have yeah, because they think for themselves and have their own opinions.
They don't just do whatever. Sing more about dragons.
uh, that that reminds me of a we were talking before the show a little bit about the old Pot of Thunder episodes we were going back and listening to, and there was one where I can't remember how it came up, and they were just talking about like lyrical themes and
Mm-hmm.
like people that do like obvious lyrical themes, and they're just like, like Ronnie James Dio going, "Hey, can you dig up something about dragons?" Write me some lyrics. I got to write some lyrics about dragons. It's just like, but yeah, that's pretty much why him and Richie got along because that's where they were at the time. But
Yeah, they're very much synced up on that. So, Pot of
but I mean,
Thunder is a great show. If you want to listen to some really great analysis, mostly about Kiss until recently, check them out. Not that they need our tiny amount of influence helping them, but if you haven't heard of them, definitely check it out.
oh yeah, when I want to laugh, like those guys get me going.
Yeah,
Um,
you will laugh. Um, Inkpen111 also writes, what if there had been another Purple LP after Come Taste the Band? The
Oh boy.
age-old question. Yeah,
All right. Well, if it was, I mean, assuming that it was the Mark IV lineup,
mhm.
um, I don't know. I think,
That's true. Yeah, yeah. I mean, I guess the assumption would be that was what I
yeah.
would assume is it would still be Mark IV.
Um, God, I don't know. I think it might have sucked.
You think so? Well, I guess to assume that you'd have to assume that.
That nothing got better after the tour.
Well, yeah, yeah. But
I mean, if there was another album after that, then like let's just if you put it out there, if things had happened the way that they had happened, they probably would have had to replace Tommy Bolin and Glenn Hughes
yeah, probably.
because Tommy would have passed away and Glenn would have been too messed up to for them to want to continue with them.
I
That's
guess
what
a lot of assumptions have to be made here. One is that they're kind of clean enough to get it together. Two, Tommy Bolin doesn't die, and three, we could stay with the Mark IV lineup. But I think if you take material from Whitesnake, North Winds, Pace Ashton Lord, Play Me Out, and kind of fold all that stuff together, man, you could add some great stuff there.
okay, well,
Those are all great albums by themselves, as far as I'm concerned.
oh
But
yeah, no, I agree.
if you rolled all that stuff in together and just had Deep Purple backing some of Coverdale's work and bringing in some of the stuff that John Lord brought to Pace Ashton Lord and some of, they all could have used, well, Hughes probably more than any could have used a little tempering on Play Me Out, even though I love that album. If you had a little less space high and a little more kind of like Coverdale blues, but add a little bit more of that Glenn Hughes funk into some of the Whitesnake stuff. And by Whitesnake, of course, I mean David Coverdale Whitesnake, not Whitesnake, the band Whitesnake.
Yeah, early Whitesnake. Yeah. Yeah, like early White, which is basically Coverdale. Yeah,
Right.
because
Oh, I'm talking about the first two the David Coverdale solo albums, not the
right.
Whitesnake per se.
Well, I mean, I guess the question for me would be like it would to answer it is like if they were going on the way they did and they kept everybody, it would have been a disaster.
Yeah.
Um,
Yes.
if the scenario was is like that was real life. If it were real life, then I think they would have replaced Tommy Bolin and Glenn Hughes. But and then who's to say like who would have been the
Well,
replacement?
there's another hypothetical. If they had to replace Glenn Hughes and Tommy Bolin, who would they have replaced them with?
Well, I mean, I don't even think I've ever heard of them. I mean, obviously, like, that the band ended and then they were done from 76 till 84. So it's like, there was no, like, hey, well, let's try and continue on. Or they fired them and tried to hire a new singer or bass player or whatever. And then it didn't work out. It was just
Great if then they got, or if then they got Paul Rogers. Richie would have been so pissed.
then he would have wanted to come back and then Richie would have been back in the band. But let's say though, best case scenario is that if all of them were cleaned up and performing at their peak, then a Mark IV after Come Taste the Band would have been awesome.
Yeah, no question.
Like absolutely, because I mean, like even just hearing like a minute of like the Ian Pace, like Tommy Bolin jamming, it's like, and we heard Tommy Bolin on the Tommy Bolin episode. It's just like when he was really able to like rip, he was great.
Yeah. Oh, and I didn't even bring in. Sorry, I didn't even bring in Teaser and Private Eyes, like that material as well. I mean, wow, folding all that stuff together would have just been incredible.
Yeah. So like, yeah, assuming that there was another album after Come Taste the Band, it would have been great if the band was like back, if they were like all clean, if they were all on the same page, if they were all getting along, all that kind of stuff.
Yep.
I think. I mean, of course. I mean, they were all great musicians. I mean, still, that's the one thing about Deep Purple is like there was like as messed up as they had got sometimes. None of them were bad musicians.
No, they're all great musicians.
I mean, they always pick the best of the best, in my opinion.
Yep. Stratcars on Twitter asks, what was the best song of Deep Purple in all lineups used as a concert opener?
Oh boy. Um, geez, I mean, I think that would require have my knowledge, having seen more live Deep Purple shows, because it's like I really don't know beyond the 70s what they really opened their live shows with, because I haven't really seen many of their live performances past that. Like, to be honest, like, I mean, I've seen Denmark 72, California Jam, obviously the Made in Japan. I mean, and I know what they've opened with. I mean, I always thought, like, that was kind of the iconic opener was Highway Star. I mean, it was made to be a concert opener. Um,
Mhm.
but that's just my limited knowledge. So, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, they opened, they opened with Burn for a while.
That's cool too. I mean, that's a great opener,
I'd
Burn.
say to me it'd be a toss up between Burn and Highway Star. Highway Star is great, and no offense to Speed King, but I feel like Highway Star is just kind of the evolved form of Speed King.
Well, it's like I don't know. It was almost like it was written to be an opener. It's like a natural kind of like lead-in song for like a great show. It's got all the elements like we talked about in our Machine Head show
Hmm.
episode. I mean, so I know it sounds like I kind of feel like it's a boring answer. Like
Yeah.
if I had like a deep knowledge of like everything they ever opened with, I wish I could have pulled out some kind of deep track where I'm like, oh, it would have been great if they opened with the Shield.
Well, the sh-
I'm only kidding. I don't know.
well, I don't. They didn't. Well, at least if we're talking Mark 1 through 4, there wasn't a lot of changes to they didn't have a ton of songs. They had Speed King, they had Highway Star, they had Burn.
Hmm.
Did they open with? They might have opened with Stormbringer during the Stormbringer tour. I'm not sure, but I think they were still opening with Burn with Tommy Bolin. I could be mistaken.
Hmm.
Strat Cars on Twitter also asks why the Hammond organ was such a vital part of Deep Purple.
Hmm. I don't know. I think that like John Lord was just like a immense talent. I mean, we've already talked about that, so I don't need to overstate that. But there was just something about the way that he played and the way that he integrated it into the music and the way that he wrote the music and just the sound of the organ with all of them together. Like for me, it really just defined like that hard rock 70s sound. Like to me it made like keyboards like were actually like cool, they were actually heavy. And I mean, yeah, there have been like organs and keyboards and stuff in other 70s and 60s bands or whatever, but I don't know, he just had it, I think.
Well, and it was like the organ as like a lead instrument too. It wasn't
Yeah.
so much just like a pad in the background. Like if you think of the first Black Sabbath album versus the first, or not the first, but versus In Rock, say,
Hmm.
the difference in sound there is you've got this much. Black Sabbath sounds a lot more stripped down, and
Yeah.
later Black Sabbath would start bringing in some synths and some organ and stuff like that, but it was never like the focal point. Aside from a few little bits and pieces here and there, it was never like the focal point of the music. Whereas with Deep Purple, it was really kind of a duo. And if you ask Richie Blackmore, of course, you'd probably say that the guitar was more important, but the underlying organ was crucial to how they sounded and how they differentiated themselves. Other bands had organs. Zeppelin would bring in organs on some songs. You had other bands like the Doors that had an organ and no bass player or whatever it is, but nobody really used it quite the way that Deep Purple did at the time.
Nah, he was like, he doesn't get enough credit for like really pioneering that sound. I mean, for him it's like the equivalent to like when you have a band with like two guitar players. It was like
Hmm.
the other lead instrument, or like I remember a while ago before I knew who they were, when we were younger, like E-Rock, he was really into Iron Maiden, and he
Yeah.
was describing Iron Maiden to me, and he's just like he was like, oh, it's all about the bass. It's all about the bass player. Like the bass is like the third guitar in that band, you know.
Hmm.
And it's true, you know. And you know, Steve Harris is like, you know, kind of, you know, another one of those great, you know, if you, you know, put the name of like great players up there, like great bass player, because that was his thing. You know, he made his instrument stand out because he didn't just like, you know, plod away in the background. And I think that's the same thing that John Lord did, is he did something unique with his instrument just by being a great talent and having great instincts and being around like the just other great musicians.
And there are some bands that have two guitar players or even three guitar players sometimes, where you're like, I don't think they need all these guitar players. Like there's a lot
Yeah.
of duplication going on here, but Iron Maiden's a great example of a band that takes advantage of the fact that there's two guitars. They're not going to be playing the exact same thing. And that's similar to here. He's not just going along, he's filling spaces being left by Richie and vice versa, and they're soloing, and that's, I think, what makes it interesting.
The other thing too is good songs. I mean, you know, really talented musician is not anything without being a great songwriter. And I mean, obviously, I mean, he wrote the friggin' concerto. So,
Right.
I mean, you know, of course, not the highest rated thing that we've ever listened to, of course, but I mean, you know, him and all the other guys like wrote great songs together. And, you know, luckily they were talented songwriters. Otherwise, their talents wouldn't have been featured in that way. And so, like, just really, um, you know, iconic in the world of classic rock.
So Tim Terzaza, I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right, on Twitter asks, what if Glenn Hughes had been in Mark II?
Hmm.
And I'm assuming that means no Glover and him with Gillan? Or is he taking over for Gillan and Glover? Well, I guess that
Well,
would be a different hypothetical. I guess that would mean him with Gillan.
all right. Well, in the scenario with him with Gillen, I don't know. I think it would. I think the bass playing would have been really cool, but the vocals would have been. I don't know if they would have worked because him and Gillen were too similar in the way that they were just similar types of singers. Not that just because of the register of their voice. Not that like they're completely different in that like Glenn Hughes is really, as we've established, like really soulful, and Gillen is really, you know, not. He's soulful in a different way, not funky soulful, but it's just
Right.
like their voices are too similar in that I don't think they would have harmonized in a way that him and Coverdale did. Not as well. That's what I think.
Yeah, I can't see it really working that well vocally between the two of them, like that same magic you get between Coverdale and Hughes. Um, it's one of those examples of, sometimes you could take all the greatest musicians in the world and put them in a band together and the band could suck. It
Hmm.
doesn't, taking amazing people and cramming them together doesn't always make the best music. And Hughes and Ian singing together, I just have a real hard time imagining what it would be like. Love to hear it though.
I mean, if he didn't sing at all and was just playing bass, I think it would have been really cool. Um, Although I can't imagine Hughes not jumping in and singing.
Yes.
And if it were Hughes doing bass and vocals, just in like a scenario where there was no Ian Gillan or David Coverdale, that I think would have been really kind of interesting because
Yeah, if
that's what he was
looking at,
planning on doing.
right, that's kind of almost what he thought was going to happen. And I think that could have worked really well, although it would have been a shame to not get that chemistry that Coverdale and Hughes had together.
But I mean, think of that. That would have been really interesting if like he was up there just like playing bass and like singing like Child in Time.
Hmm.
I mean, he totally could have done that.
I mean, if they had been able to rein him in enough, I think that would have been a truer continuation of Mark II, more
Mhm.
like maybe what the fans would have been looking for, than what they actually got with Mark III, which ended up pleasing quite a few people, but there were definitely those people that were looking for the Ian Gillan element, which
Yeah.
he would have had. Murray Bulger on Twitter asks, what if Hughes and Bolin didn't do drugs?
Then I think that the ensuing tour would have been better for Come Taste the Band, and
Mark Ford would be in Nashville right now working on their 16th studio album.
yeah, I mean, who knows? They might have called it quits after a couple of more albums for other reasons, but I mean,
Sure.
because everybody, like, I mean, they were all like so talented and did so many other projects and everything that they might have just like parted under good terms and just been like, we want to explore other things. Let's just dissolve the band. But that would go back to that scenario of like, you know, them say having a great tour, coming off of it, and then doing like a great follow up to like Come Taste the Band, and then
Yep.
like another tour, and maybe maybe even like becoming like, then that would have gotten us into like the late 70s territory. And then, oh my God, like the one thing that spared us was like Disco Purple.
And that is kind of a question. Would it have ever gotten to Disco Purple? And I could very well, they were pretty close.
I feel like it could have easily gotten there because I mean, with like, especially with Hughes.
Did disco technically exist yet in 1975?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know all the
like a late 70s or like.
Well, that's what it became.
Saturday Night Fever came out in 77, so I'm sure disco hadn't just been invented. It must have been around for a few years.
Well, it didn't really become popular or as polished until the late 70s, but it was around as early as the early to mid 70s. But it was you know, more rooted in like you know, soul and Motown, which was stuff that Coverdale really loved. So if you think about it, like. In Coverdale, and then, you know, John Lord in the background, you know, try to get picture John Lord. I could picture him totally wearing the friggin' white leisure suit with the V-neck going all the way down his navel. I'd like basically dressed up like friggin' Glenn Hughes, like all of them wearing like matching white suits, and like, you know, the disco ball, and like, oh God, it would have been hilarious actually.
I can see them playing on what's that show where they do the dancing segment where they dance?
Solid Gold.
Not Solid Gold, like the really not, I want to say like American Bandstand, but that's not the show. The one where, you know, they'd play and like they'd all be sitting around clapping, and like a different person would be like doing the dance down the line. And
oh God, Soul Train.
Yes, thank you. I can see them.
Oh my
Deep
God.
Purple on Soul Train.
I mean, yeah, I mean, history spared us Disco Purple, but
I wouldn't say spared us. I wish we could have seen that.
Actually, I think it would have been cool, and I think that it would have like, I mean, if you think about it, right? I mean, Hughes, Coverdale, and then like, just the way that they were going. I mean, I don't know. I could have seen like, I don't know, John Lord and Ian Pace seemed to be like open to like those different directions. I think that, and he liked to experiment with the synth and everything. And you know, Pacey was along for the ride type of thing.
They
like
done like a disco version of the concerto. Like, you know, you had that Mozart disco, the Beethoven. You could have had you could have had the disco concerto.
Well, sure. I mean, if the score didn't blow into the ocean, but I mean, you know, it's.
I know that was the unfortunate part.
But yeah, that would be, I don't know if it would have happened, but let's just say that's an interesting thing to think about.
It would be incredible.
Yeah.
Murray Bulger on Twitter also asks, what if Hughes played more rock than funk?
I think it would have been awesome. I mean, we heard him do more rock in Trapeze. If you just listen to any of the early Trapeze albums, like not even the stuff that you just put on, but just pick up like the first, like the second and the third album, Medusa and We Are the Music.
Yep.
I think not so much the first one, because the first one was really still kind of like 60s-ish sounding.
Yeah.
But it didn't really showcase that. But like Hughes was a rock. He like rocked really hard. Like there was like really no evidence, or very little evidence, of him being like really funky on those.
Like songs like Medusa and Seafull and stuff like that. Very like Black Sabbath sounding almost.
Yeah, really raw. Like I think if he had like if he could like flip the switch and be like, all right, I'm not going to be funky right now. Like he could totally nail that. Yeah.
I just don't think he wants to flip that switch. Murray Bulger also asks on Twitter, what if Mark 2, 3, and 4 didn't break up and one lineup kept going to last the 70s into the 80s?
Ooh. Oh, wait a minute.
So I guess I don't know if he means like what if Mark II didn't break up? What if Mark III didn't break up? Like what? And they kept going. But I guess we could just take it from with Mark II. What if Mark II didn't break up? That I can't imagine what. I mean, I guess you kind of just have to think about Mark III and IV songs with Gillan and Glover, or not necessarily the songs, but the style that Blackmore was going in. Think of layering in some Rainbow into there and some of the things that maybe Pace, Ash, and Lord did.
It's hard to think about though, because it's like you really, when you hear of the other stuff that Richie did, like with Rainbow and everything like that, it's like I think that like he was a huge part of the Deep Purple sound, like the musical sound, like the instrumental sound. Like if you take away everything else, I mean, his guitar was like, and his style was defining to that sound, and that's why. That's probably like if Richie was like part of Come Taste the Band, it would have sounded more Purple like, just because I don't know, you know what I mean? It's hard to imagine early Deep Purple without him,
Yeah,
because it was such a,
Rainbow's kind of like an extension of
yeah,
Purple, whereas and Whitesnake's kind of like an extension of later Purple. They kind of like
yeah.
branched out in these two different directions.
But it's hard because the direction that Richie went in, like I can't picture like Ian Gillan getting into all that medieval stuff, because he's
Yeah,
just he's too like quirky, you know. Like his
yeah.
lyrics were just like too quirky and stuff. Like he'd be like, "Oh, I want to sing about a popcorn machine or something." I don't know. And then and Richie's just like, "I want to sing about like the like slaying a dragon and you know and stuff like that, and the Dread Pirate Roberts, and I don't know."
Um,
Like that's another thing too. It's just like I wish that Richie Blackmore could have gotten like contract to do the soundtrack for The Princess Bride. That would have been awesome.
oh, that would have been great. Mark
Or
Knopfler would have been out of work though.
true, but anyways, yeah. So that's I don't know. I can't.
I think your closest thing is really you're kind of looking at it with Rainbow and Whitesnake and just kind of different,
Yeah,
uh, maybe toned back a little bit. I mean, with Whitesnake, it is almost Deep Purple at a certain point, and Rainbow doesn't quite get quite as close to Mark II as Whitesnake gets to Mark III.
yeah. I know what you mean.
But you know what I mean. But it's close.
But it's hard to think about, because you would have to like suspend like
There's a lot of stuff to.
everything that you know, and kind of like create that scenario. Like what if Mark One never broke up? Like I can't picture him really being successful with those other two guys, just because like I mean who knows how they would have progressed.
Right.
I mean, we know that in Captain Beyond, like our buddy Rod there was doing some really wild stuff, but I
Sure.
mean he still had that really kind of like smooth type of voice. So it's just like I don't know if he would have been as high energy, and if they would have gotten the attention. Plus I mean he was not as good looking as like Ian Gillan.
Well, that
He
does
just
some of it, but I
he
think
just wasn't.
Rod Evans in Captain Beyond and Nick Semper in Warhorse also just kind of show you like they both had some chops for sure, and could have done more, but who knows
Yeah,
the inner workings of all that. Um, Murray Belger on Twitter also asks, "What if what if Ian Pace played more double kick?"
well, that's kind of a I don't know, kind of a technical question. I don't know.
I'm personally not a huge fan of the double kick. I like kind of a more minimalist set when it comes to drums. And not to say that, I mean, there's tons of music I like that has double kick and drummers that use double kick, but I like that Pace limited himself to some point.
I mean, I guess he could have done it. I mean, considering like the stuff that you heard from him, I mean, it probably would have fit right in.
Sure.
Like the beginning, like drum intro to like Fireball and stuff. You could easily hear it there,
Yeah.
if you wanted to. But I don't know. I think it would have fit in. But like I said, I think it's a really kind of nerdy drum question. I don't really know a lot about drums, but I mean, I would say it'd be interesting to hear. I think that would have kind of like made him like the godfather of like prog metal or something, prog metal drummers or something.
Murray Bulger on Twitter asks, "What if Peter Grand, the legendary Led Zeppelin manager, was manager of Deep Purple?"
Um, hmm.
I do not know really anything about Peter Grand,
All
uh,
right. Well,
but
neither do I.
I would say this. You could also pose this question of what if Deep Purple had competent management at all during this
That
time
might have been it.
and
Yeah, that might have been.
was able to manage this band in a way where they didn't burn them out, where they didn't allow them to get into such a bad situation with each other. I know history has shown through multiple iterations that Gillan and Blackmore just couldn't work together, but I know that they could have made it work better and could have made it work longer, at least in that first run, with
Oh
better
yeah.
management and not being worked to death.
Oh well, when you hear about how they let the original guys go and how they, how little time they gave them between albums, and then when it came to recording the albums and like the money that they blew on the first album cover, I mean, we could go on and on about, it's just like the horrible decisions that these people made and the way that they they treated them, like. And so my guess is that if, like, the Led Zeppelin guy was, let's say he was a competent manager, if that's what they're asking, then
Yep.
yeah, they probably would have lasted longer. Their output might have been, it was quality, but I mean, the stuff that they admitted that they didn't really like so much about maybe their albums or the album covers or whatever could have come out better.
It's not the only measurement, but thinking about Zeppelin as starting a year or two before Deep Purple and lasting up into the early 80s,
Mm-hmm.
and how, we're not talking about all the different lineups of Led Zeppelin. It was always the same lineup. So again, that's not the only measure of a band sticking together, but some of that has to be good management, because I'm sure they were working just as hard as Deep Purple and touring just as hard as Deep Purple and had all the same rock star excess problems as Deep Purple. We know that a lot of that is true. So they managed to have a core band stick together for all of that time. I don't know, 15 years or at least
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
together, putting out great albums and touring and everything. So that this Peter Grand was doing something right.
Now, why don't we imagine a world where Neil Bogart and Bill Aucoin, who managed Kiss, were Deep Purple's managers? Then there would have been the Deep Purple amusement park, Deep Purple lunchboxes, Deep Purple comic book,
The movie with that haunted amusement park or whatever.
Deep Purple meets the Phantom of the Park,
That was, yeah.
where John Lord like strikes an organ chord and like Frankenstein goes, "Ah!" you
Oh, that was a good hypothetical too.
know?
Um, Mary Bulger again on Twitter asks, "What if Ian Pace could sing and sang a song like Bill Ward sang 'It's All Right'?"
Ooh, that would have been different.
That'd been interesting. I wonder
Um,
what song would we give to Ian Pace? I feel like it would be like one of those like oddball songs, like "Farmer's Daughter" or something. You know what I mean? Like one of those off the wall, kind of not typical in their typical style.
yeah.
It wouldn't have been Child in Time.
I don't know because I don't think like he never really like those guys never had mics or anything like that. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah,
Richie
just
and
like
like
John Lord in the early days, but
yeah.
Richie never, I don't think.
Oh, yeah, that's right. Yeah, in the early days, like on the what do you call it, like the Playboy After Dark or whatever, when they were
Yeah.
doing Hush, like he had a microphone, but like later incarnations, it was just like Ian Gillan or just Coverdale and Hughes that like did the singing. So I don't know. I can't really picture it. I feel like that would be one of those kind of like, jumping the shark moments. It's just like, hey, let's give the drummer a song, and then, it's just like, what's this guy doing singing, and then the band breaks up. Like I don't know, I can't picture it just because I've also like never even heard him do background, but I've only heard him speak.
Yeah.
So it's like, it's an interesting question though, because it's like, but I don't really,
Yeah,
No scenario really comes to mind.
I guess it would depend what kind of style his voice was.
Mhm.
Murray Bulger on Twitter again asks, "What if Blackmore we kind of covered this already, but what if Blackmore liked funk going into the late '70s? Would Purple have turned into a disco rock band?" And I think we kind of covered that. I mean, if he liked funk, I think Hughes just would have been like, just rubbing his hands together, like, "All right, like I got it." Like, and I think that we talked about before too, the tension between the band members having those different styles is what makes something truly great and original.
Yeah.
And if you just had five guys that loved funk, then you just have this oppressively funky band. And I think it's great that you had the, jazz elements and classical elements and funk elements, rock elements, all blues elements, all mixed together is what made that sound great. And having everyone just kind of agreeing about what style of music they are with no tension, might have made some cool music, but I don't think it would have been as interesting. It might have been more generic.
Yeah, maybe. I mean, it depends. I mean, unless you take like Blackmore's like funkiest tendencies that we'd already heard, and he
Yep.
kind of kept those, then I mean, yeah, maybe it would have been cool. But then you would have had like him and Glenn Hughes and Coverdale like going out to Studio 54, hanging out with like Liza Minnelli and Andy Warhol doing lines of coke, while Coverdale was in the bathroom like shagging away, and all this
Well,
like
Hughes would have had the suit already, the white suit. He would have been ready.
hanging out with Travolta and everything. Is just like comparing suits. Hey, what's going on?
Comparing suits. Oh, they're pretty much the same. Danny MD71 on Twitter asks, "I've heard that Roger Glover really happened to be brought into the band by chance because he tagged along with Ian Gillan for his audition/jam. What do you think would have happened if he weren't in the band, at least initially? Would Nick Simper have stayed long?"
Hmm. Um. Well, I mean, I don't know the. I don't know because they always talked about how rooted in like 50s music he was and how he wasn't right for the band sound and everything. I think they would have kept looking for a different bass player, but
Yeah,
if
I don't know. And was reading, I forget which book it was that I was reading it in. It might have been the Road of Golden Dust, but talking about how they wonder if there was something else going on with Simper that they were just not being honest about, which wouldn't be crazy because Blackmore is not maybe the world's most, he can tend to be a little passive aggressive or whatever. Like hearing Simper's work on the last Mark One album, hearing his work with Warhorse, you're like, this guy is a really good bass player, like for this kind of music. So I don't really buy this idea that like Roger Glover brought this totally new. He did bring a lot of songwriting for sure, but I don't
yeah,
know if they even had that in mind when they brought him in initially. Like Glover brings so much more to a band than just the bass playing, and that's great. But strictly as a bass player, Simper, I don't see him bringing a ton more or less than Glover.
no, I mean I would say like if none of that had happened and like Ian Gillan got in the band and there was no tension or whatever, like would he have or whatever happened with him, would he have fit in? I think so because I mean I've talked about like especially on the self-titled Deep Purple album how he was just like a really heavy good bass player and I'm
Yeah.
like yeah he could have totally like I think he could have played on in rock and definitely the concerto and everything else. Like I mean, if and I mean I've seen interviews with him where he was like, he's actually the like it's between him and Rod Evans, of course, and he's the only one that's done any interviews. Like Rod, you haven't seen anything from him,
Right.
but he's talked about the kind of the sneaky way that he was fired. He found out from like someone else or whatever. Even John Lord has said it, but it's like I feel like he wanted to stay in the band and he would have continued with the band, and I think he would have been. Um, I think he would have fit in. I think he would have still been a contributor. I mean, who knows what, like you said, what Richie or any of them were thinking about in terms of like why they didn't want him in there, like his playing or it wasn't the right style for them or whatever. I mean, he obviously proved that he could, get heavy.
All right. Well, that's kind of the end of our listener list questions. Thank you so much for all those questions. You have anything else to add before we wrap up these Mark 1 through 4 hypotheticals?
Hmm. No. I can't, that's the thing. I don't have any of these. Like, I like it when people throw stuff like that out because then it gets me thinking of like other things and, like I said, kind of stream of consciousness thing. But there was no, I don't have any like standalone things that I've been wondering. It's just like I feel like stuff like this comes about the best in like kind of conversation.
Yeah, so keep those questions coming on Twitter and
Yeah.
or email or Instagram, however you want to contact us. It's kind of the tricky thing is getting all these questions from all these different formats and figuring out what's coming in from who.
Mm.
But okay, so I'm going to head right into our news segment. And to kick it off, we've got some interesting news. And that news is that Glenn Hughes is replacing John Corabi and Marco Mendoza in the band The Dead Daisies.
It's crazy.
So the bass player and singer have left the band, and they're like, well, why pay two guys to do what one guy can do? Bring in Glenn Hughes. So that was just announced. I guess they're going to be heading into the studio early 2021, or that might have been something else. But
And really, why in Sam Hill would you need anybody else?
I mean, Glenn Hughes, come on. Also in news, Glenn Hughes played the Stone Deaf Festival, and he did a couple of interviews, and another one just dropped right before the episode we recorded, and it's supposed to be kind of spicy, so I want to check that one out. So I haven't checked that one out yet, but he has an interview about another one of his bands, Black Country Communion, going into the studio in January to start recording a new album. That's his band with um, uh, Jason Bonham and Joe Bonamassa
Mm-hmm.
and Derek Shernahan.
Yeah, good
So,
stuff.
so really, really good stuff. I mean, all of those guys are just that's one of those super groups like we talk about, but it works. The
Yeah.
really amazing musicians in that band. So that should
And
be
great
interesting.
albums too. Yeah.
Yeah, really good stuff. And finally, the world record on coming up on September 20th, world record for the largest electric guitar ensemble is being hosted by Steve Morse and Deep Purple. And they're going to see how many guitarists they can get so they can get into the world record book. I'm assuming they're going to be playing Smoke on the Water. I mean, if you've got Deep Purple there, and you need something that you can get 1,000 guitarists of any skill level to be able to play, it sounds like a no-brainer. That should be interesting. Be interested to see some video from that. I'm sure it's going to sound great.
Oh
They're like,
man.
I read some stuff about. They're like, bring your guitar and your amp. It's just like everyone's just going to plug in. It's just going to be absolute chaos.
Oh. That should be a lot of fun.
Yeah, we'll call that a Deep Purple live album. Whatever comes out of that.
Oh,
I was
man.
like, part of me was like, should I go to that just so I could say I jammed with Steve Morse? I'm like, no. So I think it's somewhere in Ohio or something. It's like I could drive there, but probably not on September 20th. All right. So other than that, we've got some interesting historical dates coming up, which I know you'll be interested in. And our first date and our most important of the week, and this is the week of this episode will come out September 16th. So this is for the week of September 16th through September 22nd. And funny that I mentioned September 22nd because what date is that other than the birthday of the man himself, David Coverdale?
For 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 all of our listeners, Nate just pulled up a picture of Coverdale, just like brandishing his usual and infamous microphone schlong, while screaming into the sky.
Well, it's extra funny because it's like if that's his penis, what is wrong with the tip? It's got like 3 legs coming out of it. So you've got John was not entirely correct because he said I pulled up one picture of David Coverdale doing this, but I've got a virtual slideshow
Oh my goodness.
of
Oh, that's
pictures
fun.
of him doing this. Because let me tell you, when you Google David Coverdale, this is my favorite one. He's-
He looks so spiritual in this one.
this is a very spiritual look for him. But it's not hard to find these pictures because he must
Oh, I
do
like
it.
that one. He's wanking on that one.
That one he's wanking. Well, that one it's almost like the microphone his schlong in that one because that's very much more reserved. Another one here. This one's pointed straight up, like straight up.
Oof, yeah, he took his pills that day.
You got another one here, like straight out into the audience there. That one he's really like welcoming the audience and like sharing this moment with like this is for all of you, you know.
What he's just like, yeah, that's right, you're taking it. Anybody that's not watching right now is just missing a cornucopia of
You'll have to
fantastic pictures of Coverdale, just like, I don't know, just like splotzing all over the audience with his microphone wiener.
I wonder if I'll have to put these all like in the show notes, or if not, you just if this episode makes it to YouTube, just check out the last few minutes so you can check this out. Whitesnake did release a new video, I believe, yesterday.
Yeah.
Which for their song "Shut Up and Kiss Me."
Mm-hmm.
I live tweeted it with my live reactions of what was happening in the video, so it's pretty great. Coverdale pulls up in this white sports car, and it's got the license plate that says Whitesnake, and he goes in his club Snake, which I think is a real club that he owns, and he goes in it, and then in true Whitesnake fashion, all these scantily clad women end up crawling on the hood of his car. And his son is in the video, and his son is like making out with some chick, and
Never gets old, huh?
It's like he passed the torch. I thought it was kind of like a touching father-son moment, whereas like it's your turn for the next generation to make out with ladies on the hood of a car. I'm going to be inside with the band.
Yeah, it's your turn to be like eternally horny.
it's everyone's turn, really.
Yeah, but Coverdale more than everybody.
This is true. In additional history, September 22nd, 1977, on David Coverdale's 26th birthday, Ian Gillan was with his band, the Ian Gillan Band, live at the Budokan, recording that concert. So amazing stuff from the Ian Gillan Band, which, as you know, I'm a huge fan. And then on September 19th, 2002, in bittersweet news, Jon Lord plays his last show with Deep Purple as he gets ready to retire from the band and move on to pursuing some of his other musical endeavors. So that is a few selections from our historical file for this week. And if you want more, follow us on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook. We post them just about every day. Deep Purple important dates. And with that, it is time to call it a close on episode number 21. We'll bid you farewell. And next week, what are we going to talk about next week? I think we're going to dive into see some of our old friends. And this begins kind of a new era for the show where we start to branch out from Deep Purple proper and start talking about some of the other musical acts associated with the band, as the band is now no more, at least for a short time, and going to start visiting some of our friends that we haven't heard from in a while and see what have they been up to musically. So
sounds good.
Get into some music that we're a little less familiar with, in some cases just as familiar with, and start talking about that. So
yeah, sounds cool.
All right, man. Well, we'll talk to you about that next week.
Okay.
All right. Later.
Peace.
Thank you for listening to the Deep Purple podcast. If you like what you hear and would like more episodes in the future, please donate on Patreon to support the show. You can also give us a rating on iTunes to help new people discover the show. You can follow us on YouTube, Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook for show updates. See deeppurplepodcast.com for more details. Thank you for listening.